Alexander had a secret relationship in his youth. His first love, Mia, passed away early, leaving only their dog, Snowball, to accompany him. We had been married for 3 years, but Snowball never liked me. It tore my clothes and bit me several times, sending me to the hospital. Friends stood up for me, but Alexander responded coldly, "It's just a bite. Why argue with a dog?" After I got pregnant, I suggested sending Snowball to a foster home. Alexander replied impatiently, "If you can't handle it, let's divorce. Why are you always so petty?" In the past, I would feel ashamed and compromise when I heard this. But this time, I looked at the mess around me and remained silent for a long time. The bite mark on my shoulder had just scabbed over and still ached faintly. I said, "Then let's divorce."
Welcome to listen to my full sweet love series novel. I'm the blogger and I'm Twilight's novel. Now let's start the main story.
3 days after I was hospitalized, Alexander finally came to see me. I sat on the hospital bed, waiting for the doctor to change my bandages. Outside the room, friends were voicing their anger. "Alexander, how many times has Snowball bitten Ava?" This time it was her shoulder. It could have been her neck. Snowball was Alexander's dog, a Rottweiler with a fierce temperament. This wasn't the first time it had bitten me. When I first married Alexander, it bit my calf. But this time was the worst. My shoulder was covered in blood, with flesh torn open. Honestly, this dangerous dog should be given away. Ava has been so good to it, yet it's so ungrateful. Exactly, Alexander. Be careful it doesn't bite you next. It's untrainable. The crowd was noisy, all criticizing Snowball's aggression. When Alexander entered the room, his expression was grim. The doctor changed my bandages gently. But even with care, the wound on my shoulder still hurt, making me pale and sweaty. Alexander stood at the door, silently watching. After the doctor left, his first words were, "It's just a bite. Why argue with a dog?" He frowned, looking at me as if I were unreasonable. "Ava, you're in your 20s. Why are you tattling like a child?" How embarrassing. Someone had informed Alexander's mother about my hospitalization. Our families were close, and Alexander and I had grown up together. His mother was furious and sternly ordered him to give Snowball away. Alexander thought I had complained behind his back, causing trouble. I finally understood why he hadn't visited me in the hospital. He was angry with me. I wanted to laugh, but moving hurt my shoulder. The pain was deep, as if it reached my bones. Suddenly, I remembered the early days of our marriage. It was my first meeting with Snowball. Knowing Alexander had a dog, I carefully selected dog food and toys. But Snowball bared its teeth at me and bit my calf without warning. When my mother visited me in the hospital, I comforted her. "It's fine, it's just shy. Why argue with a dog?" I was afraid my family would scold Snowball or think poorly of Alexander. Back then, I was young and naive, full of hope for our marriage. I never imagined those words would become my nightmare. When Snowball tore my dress, Alexander frowned and told me not to make a fuss. When it rolled in mud and ruined our bed, he scolded me for being petty. And now, with my shoulder torn and bleeding, Alexander still said the same thing. He told me not to be petty, not to argue with a dog. I used to comfort myself, thinking Alexander wasn't a cold stone. I thought he was starting to care for me. He made me ginger tea during my period. He drove 10 hours overnight to celebrate my birthday at my workplace. But now, I could no longer deceive myself. After 3 years of marriage, I had never received Alexander's true affection. After being discharged, I took a taxi straight to my parents' house. My mother was surprised but then looked at my shoulder with concern. I lied, telling them it was just a minor injury that would heal in a few days. During my recovery at home, Alexander didn't call once. He had somehow convinced his mother. Snowball remained with him, not given away. During our Cold War, Alexander posted on social media, "She didn't leave much behind. Snowball is one, and I am another." She referred to Mia. Alexander had a secret relationship in his youth. Mia was his first love, the woman he loved most. Sadly, she died in an accident after only 2 years. Comments expressed sympathy. Mia was such a good person. If she were still here, she and Alexander would have been married by now. Alexander is so devoted. I heard he was heartbroken and tried to commit suicide several times but was saved. Someone asked, "What about Ava? Why did you marry her?" Others replied, "What does Ava matter? If Mia were still here, Alexander wouldn't even glance at her." Exactly. But life goes on. It's good to see Alexander moving forward with his life. Mia would be happy for him. Among the comments belittling and mocking me, I saw Alexander's reply. Settling. A few days later, Alexander started appearing in public with a girl named Sophie, a company intern who looked strikingly like Mia. In the photo, Sophie was crouching, hugging Snowball's head affectionately. The usually fierce Snowball looked unusually gentle. Alexander stood nearby, gazing at them with a tenderness he had never shown me. The day Alexander and I got married, the weather turned bad. The clear sky suddenly filled with dark clouds. Perhaps that moment hinted at the outcome of our marriage. Damp and cold, forever overshadowed by Mia's memory. But I was naive then, optimistically comforting myself, the clouds will pass, and we'll have a bright future. Later, I realized the living can never compete with the dead. Because Mia was gone, Alexander could marry anyone. I was foolish, always hoping to heal Alexander and help him move on. But I forgot. Alexander never valued my companionship. Now, stripping away the false warmth, Alexander had passed judgment on me. 3 years of marriage were nothing but settling, nothing but my unrequited love. Half a month later, Alexander finally couldn't sit still. He called, starting with an accusation. "Are you done throwing a tantrum? Why aren't you home yet?" Perhaps remembering the wound on my shoulder, his tone softened. "Don't take it out on Snowball. This breed is naturally protective. It took me a long time to train it." Alexander suddenly stopped, realizing he had slipped. He awkwardly changed the subject. "Anyway, I've disciplined it. Pack your things. I'll pick you up this afternoon." On the way back, the car was eerily silent. Alexander stiffly handed me a bag. "I bought this for you, your favorite grilled rice cakes." I didn't take it. The doctor had advised against spicy and greasy food during recovery. But Alexander clearly didn't care. Seeing me refuse, he thought I was being stubborn. He sneered and threw the bag into the trash. "Eat it or not, I don't care." The already tense atmosphere grew even colder. No one spoke for the rest of the ride. Only after we got out of the car and opened the door did the mood ease slightly. "You like the latest collection from X brand, right? I bought them and put them in the closet." To be honest, Alexander wasn't entirely bad to me. He remembered my birthday and our important anniversaries. He never hesitated to buy me gifts and gave me his cards pinned to use freely. After every argument, he would compensate me with many gifts. So I always thought he was just stubborn but cared for me deep down. I despised myself for still holding on to a sliver of hope for Alexander. I held my stomach, pretending to be calm as I opened the door. But what greeted me wasn't beautiful, delicate clothes. It was chaos. The bed, the sofa, everything was covered in torn fabric. Our wedding photo in the center of the room was shattered. Red fabric scraps fluttered down, mixing with broken glass, resembling a pool of blood. Snowball lay in the middle of the bed, covered in grass and dirt. It had sneaked into the garden and deliberately rolled in the mud. Alexander was also stunned. He frowned and called Snowball over. Seeing me, his expression turned awkward. "I didn't know it would do this. But it's just a few clothes. I'll buy you new ones. Don't blame Snowball." Snowball slowly walked over, deliberately bumping into my calf as if to assert dominance. It had something in its mouth. When I pulled it out, it was a bracelet. Alexander's face instantly changed. He kicked Snowball. "Why do you bite everything? Do you know whose this is?" Snowball might not have known, but I recognized it. It was the bracelet Mia had given Alexander. Alexander treasured it, unlike our wedding ring. After it fell from Snowball's mouth, it rolled into the broken glass. Alexander only cared about the bracelet, not sparing a glance for me. I walked over and picked up the wedding ring. Snowball is too destructive. It should be sent away. I took a deep breath. If you want me to calm down, send Snowball away. I could tolerate and compromise when I was alone. But now that I was pregnant, I couldn't risk any danger to my child. Alexander looked up, coldly warning. "Ava, don't push it. Being petty doesn't suit you." I held my stomach, cutting him off. Either I leave or Snowball leaves. You choose. My unyielding attitude finally angered Alexander. He stood up, kicking a chair. If you can handle it, stay. If not, divorce. Ava, I've had enough of your constant targeting of Snowball. It's exhausting. In the past, I would have felt ashamed and compromised. But this time, I looked at the mess and remained silent for a long time. The bite mark on my shoulder had just scabbed over and still ached faintly. I said, "Then let's divorce." I placed my hand over my stomach. Since that was the case, Alexander didn't need to know I was pregnant. This child wasn't wanted or anticipated. His father didn't love his mother, so he wouldn't love the child either. The divorce went smoothly. Alexander looked grim, but when he realized I was serious, he signed the papers. "I didn't expect you to be so petty over a dog. You're acting like a shrew." His tone was cold, almost disappointed. "If I had known, I wouldn't have married you." 3 years of marriage, a heart full of passion, ended with me being called a shrew. That night, I packed my things and moved out. Before leaving, Snowball, who had always been hostile toward me, blocked the door. Alexander called it several times, but it wouldn't budge. Snowball stared intently at the bag in my hand. I suddenly realized it was a toy I had bought to win its affection. But Snowball had never liked it, so the packaging remained unopened. But since I was leaving, I would take what I had bought. Even if I donated it to a shelter, I wouldn't waste my effort on such ingratitude. After a standoff, Alexander forcefully pulled Snowball away. As I left, I heard Snowball whimper sadly. But I didn't look back. I heard Alexander scold it angrily. "She's so heartless she doesn't want you anymore. Why are you clinging to her? How embarrassing." I was the cold-hearted villain in his eyes, making him feel ashamed and angry. Before entering the operating room, the doctor asked me one last time if I was sure about the abortion. I touched my stomach, my fingers moving slightly. It felt as if a little life was greeting me through my clothes. My mother was in poor health, and I was her only child. It seemed like a family trait. My grandmother had only had my mother. The child in my womb might be my only descendant. So I hesitated, postponing the surgery and saying I needed more time. I called my best friend to pick me up. As I left the hospital, I ran into someone familiar. Sophie was holding Alexander's arm, smiling and talking about something. Alexander also saw me. Noticing I had come from the hospital, he frowned and approached. "Why were you at the hospital? Are you feeling unwell?" I instinctively slapped his hand away, stepping back. "It's none of your business." Alexander's expression darkened. He was about to say more when Sophie swayed over. "Alexander, the movie's about to start. Let's go." Then, as if she had just noticed me, she covered her mouth in surprise. "Oh, hello. Do you know Alexander? I'm Sophie, his girlfriend." She emphasized the word, girlfriend. I didn't believe she was unaware of my relationship with Alexander. Her words felt like a provocation. Just then, my best friend arrived. Hearing this, she immediately retorted, "What girlfriend? They're married. You're just a mistress, flaunting yourself in front of the wife." Sophie's face turned ugly, but she forced a smile, looking at Alexander pitifully. "Alexander!" With a face so similar to Mia's, Sophie's teary eyes moved Alexander. As expected, Alexander was distressed. He glanced at me, his tone calm. "We're divorced." I didn't understand love before, but meeting Sophie made me realize what true love is. "Sophie is my love now. Please show some respect." My best friend was stunned, looking at me in disbelief. I hadn't told her about the divorce, and I had lied about the hospital visit, saying it was a pregnancy checkup. I had planned to tell her everything after the abortion. Seeing Sophie's smug expression, my best friend exploded. "Alexander, are you insane? Why did you divorce? Don't you know Ava is?" I quickly tried to stop her, but it was too late. She had already blurted out, "Ava is pregnant. And you divorced her for a mistress? Alexander, are you even human?" The surroundings fell silent. Sophie's pitiful expression froze. Alexander looked up sharply, his gaze fixed on my stomach. He seemed dazed, ignoring my resistance, grabbing my wrist tightly. "Ava, is it true?" Alexander almost tenderly touched my stomach, his voice hoarse. "Is there? Our child here? Sophie tried to pull Alexander away, but he didn't budge, stomping her foot in frustration. Alexander didn't even glance at her, staring only at me. He declared firmly, "My child can't grow up without a father. We're going to the Civil Affairs Bureau to remarry." I almost laughed. My 3 years of companionship and waiting couldn't warm Alexander's heart. I couldn't compare to the dog Mia had left behind. I couldn't even compare to a look-alike substitute. He had been so decisive about the divorce, so why the act now? I shook off his hand, my tone icy. "There's no child." It was a misread test result. I lied, not wanting to entangle with Alexander over the child. Sophie instantly relaxed, wiping her tears and looking at me pitifully. "Sister, even if you want to remarry, there's no need to conspire with your friend to deceive Alexander." Alexander's eyes showed a flicker of disappointment. After the emotional roller coaster, he was furious. "I only knew you were petty before, but now you're a liar too." He wrapped his arm around Sophie's waist, his tone disdainful. "Someone like you would only raise a bad child, petty and deceitful, just like you." My best friend wanted to argue further, but I stopped her. Watching the two walk away intimately, I touched my stomach. My earlier hesitation hardened again. A child born without love would never be happy. I turned back to the hospital and agreed to the surgery. Alexander officially announced his new relationship on social media. Comments were filled with relief. I always said Alexander was devoted. Even after marriage. He couldn't forget Mia. Sophie's photo was scrutinized. She looks about 50% like Mia, but Mia had better poise. Still, with someone so similar by his side, Alexander's pain must be eased. Exactly. She's much better than Ava. Ava seemed gentle and generous at first, but who knew she'd be so vicious and jealous? I heard she always bullied the dog Mia left behind. How shameful, picking on a dog. Luckily Alexander didn't indulge her and divorced her. Ava must be regretting it now. Let's support Alexander and Sophie. She looks like Mia, so she must be just as kind. After the surgery, I rested for a few days. Then I went to Alexander's company to handle the post-divorce asset division. As soon as I entered, I received stares from the employees. Some looked sympathetic, others gleeful. I ignored them, walking straight into Alexander's office. Alexander wasn't there, but Sophie was sitting on the sofa. Seeing me, she was momentarily surprised, then stood up. "Sister, are you here to see Alexander?" He went to buy me a cake. I told him the place was far and he'd have to drive a long time, but he said he'd do it as long as I liked it. Sophie's tone was complaining but hinted at sweetness. I didn't respond. Alexander was indeed a patient man. He could search every pet store for Snowball's favorite environment. But not for me. Whenever I asked him to bring me bubble tea, he'd choose the nearest place. He thought the brand I liked was too far and that I was being picky. Sophie started showing off the necklaces and jewelry Alexander had bought her. I held back but finally couldn't resist, asking her, "Do you know you're just a substitute?" She looked so much like Mia, and in Alexander's friend's eyes, she was just a poor imitation. Sophie's face stiffened, but she quickly recovered. "What does a dead person matter? If I can win Snowball's affection, I can gradually replace her. I'm young, beautiful, and know how to flirt. I'm smarter than you and understand men better." Sophie smiled confidently, mocking me. "Sister, maybe you should reflect on yourself. You couldn't win in 3 years, not even against a dead person. Are your methods lacking?" Sophie was right. She indeed had the skills. In just a month, Alexander announced their engagement. That night, she sent me a text taunting me. "This is just my first step. In half a year, I'll make Alexander forget Mia completely." On their engagement day, social media was flooded. Sophie posted a video with the caption, "Thanks to the ex-wife's divorce, I met such a loving husband." In the video, Sophie wore a high-end gown, smiling gracefully. Alexander was handsome, holding a well-groomed Snowball. The three looked harmonious and happy. But Alexander seemed distracted in the video. He kept glancing at his phone, as if waiting for a message. My best friend called, starting with a curse. "Is Alexander insane? He keeps asking if you're really pregnant." I was startled and quickly asked, "What did you say?" She replied, "Of course I denied it. Since you're divorced, Don't get involved with such a scumbag. By the way, guess how I responded? She chuckled proudly. I said, "You've been married for 3 years with no child. Alexander, are you impotent? Maybe you're destined to be childless." I laughed, but the laughter soon faded. No, Alexander loved Sophie so much. They would have a child soon. I touched my stomach. The little life was gone. I felt a surge of guilt, silently apologizing. "I'm sorry, my child. I couldn't give you a happy family." To help me move on from the failed marriage, my family quickly arranged blind dates. Friends also enthusiastically introduced potential partners. One of them was a young man named Ryan, a 21-year-old college student, sunny and handsome, a classic puppy love type. After meeting me once, he started pursuing me relentlessly. I felt I was too old and divorced, so I kept refusing. But Ryan had a face that was hard to resist. His beautiful eyes blinked as he cooed, "Sister," making it difficult to say no. So I agreed to his weekend invitation. Ryan was lively. He took me to an escape room and then to play board games. Perhaps drawn to his youthful energy, I felt a rare sense of relaxation. As we left the mall, laughing and chatting, we ran into Alexander and Sophie. Sophie looked somewhat haggard, trailing behind Alexander, her voice pleading, "I didn't know Snowball didn't like purple clothes. I won't buy them again. Please don't be mad." They were tugging at each other, Alexander's face stern and silent. Sophie didn't understand why Alexander was upset about the purple clothes. But I knew. It was because Mia had been wearing a purple dress the day she died. And I had learned this lesson in a painful way. It was our wedding anniversary. I had spent 6 hours getting ready, excited for our date. As soon as we met, Snowball suddenly attacked, tearing my dress. Alexander's expression at that moment still made me shiver. He flipped the table in front of everyone, splashing soup all over me. I was cold-shouldered for 3 months, not even allowed home. All because I had worn a purple dress on our date. But Sophie was more likable than I had been. After some coaxing, Alexander's attitude softened. "No, next time." The two became intimate again. When Alexander looked up, he saw me standing not far away. His pupils contracted, as if surprised or delighted. But then he noticed Ryan beside me. Ryan was carrying my bag, whining for me to take a walk in the park with him. Alexander's face twisted momentarily, and he suddenly strode over. He forcefully separated me from Ryan, demanding, "Who is he?" I was caught off guard by Alexander's actions. He glared at me, his eyes red with anger. "Ava, you've already found a replacement? You're really desperate, huh?" Alexander took a deep breath and slapped me. I didn't react in time, stumbling from the force, my cheek instantly swelling. "No wonder you wanted a divorce. Why are you so promiscuous? If you needed a man, you could have come to me. I wouldn't have turned you away." Alexander's harsh words were cut off by a punch. Ryan, furious, pulled me behind him and swung again. "Who do you think you are, hitting her? Your words are disgusting." Ryan, who loved fitness and had studied Taekwondo, quickly drew blood from Alexander. Only when security arrived were the two separated. Ryan's lip was split, but he gently reassured me he was fine. Sophie was also stunned, quickly helping Alexander up. Before leaving, she threatened me angrily. "This isn't over. You'll face the consequences from the Alexander family." At the hospital, I carefully applied medicine to Ryan's wounds. He looked up at me, his gaze unwavering, his demeanor obedient. I couldn't bear his stare, nervously turning away. "I'm sorry for causing you trouble, getting you hospitalized." My voice was full of guilt. But Ryan didn't mind. "Sister, it's not your fault. Any decent person would stand up to such a scumbag. I'd hit him again if I saw him." Ryan was young, sincere, passionate, and straightforward. During his recovery, our relationship gradually warmed. Ryan secretly prepared a venue and flowers to confess his feelings. I pretended not to know, not spoiling the surprise. But as I prepared to meet him, I received a call. Alexander's voice was icy. "Ava, explain the 30-plus packages at the door?" When I arrived, the packages had been opened. Baby items were scattered everywhere. Clothes, wipes, shoes, socks, even formula covered the floor. Alexander stood amidst it all, his eyes bloodshot. "You said you weren't pregnant. How do you explain these? I had bought them early, many on pre-order. After moving out, I forgot to change the address.
Alexander's eyes were bloodshot, glaring at me.
I went to the hospital. You aborted it.
You aborted our child.
A tear rolled down Alexander's cheek as he nearly screamed. Ava, how have I wronged you? That was our child.
How could you be so heartless, not even telling me?
Alexander pushed me against the wall, kissing me fiercely. I bit his lip until it bled, but he didn't let go. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Alexander sobbed, holding me tightly. Ava, stop this. Let's get back together. I didn't know what prompted Alexander to say this. All these years, he had been indifferent and cold toward me. My status at home was even lower than a dog's. Now, a life stood between us. Alexander's words only made me feel sick. I slapped him hard across the face. Alexander stumbled, his cheek instantly swelling. I thought he'd be angry, but instead, he relaxed. Are you mad about me hitting you? Then hit me again. If it's not enough, hit me more. His affectionate demeanor disgusted me. Fine, if you want to get back together, send Snowball away. I knew Snowball was Alexander's weakness. He hesitated but soon seemed resolute. If you're willing to remarry, I'll send it away. His words felt like a condescending concession. I didn't want to waste more breath. I grabbed my bag and left. Alexander kept rambling behind me. Ava, I think you need time to cool down. I'm willing to give you that. Please think it over. Don't mind Mia. She's been gone a long time. We need to move forward. Honestly, I've had feelings for you all these years. Our marriage wasn't so bad. Once you calm down, let's remarry. After that, you can do whatever you want. The area was remote, and it was hard to get a cab as it grew dark. Alexander wanted to drive me, but his phone rang. Sophie's voice was tearful. Alexander, my boss is forcing me to drink with clients. They're groping me. I'm hiding in the bathroom, scared. The man who had just been begging me to remarry panicked. A girl who looked like Mia was being forced to drink and groped. Alexander punched a tree, his fist bleeding. Those bastards, daring to touch my woman? Ava, I'll call a friend to drive you. I have to go to Sophie. Before leaving, Alexander seemed hesitant, but Sophie's crying left him no choice. I never met the friend Alexander promised. He was always like this. His words were like clouds, empty and unreliable. He never kept his promises to me. It started to rain. I hid under a tree and finally got a cab after 2 hours. A notification sounded. Sophie's text was disdainful. Sister, you lost again. He chose me. After returning, I developed a high fever from the rain. When I woke up, my phone was flooded with calls and texts from Alexander. He apologized, even promising to break things off with Sophie if I remarried him. But I refused. After a few days of silence, I thought he had given up. Instead, I received a package. The package was ordinary, but it made me uneasy. When I opened it, I was met with a pool of blood. The shock froze me in place.
Alexander's voice was deranged. Ava, you blamed it for biting you.
So I cut off its mouth to apologize.
Is that enough?
Inside the package was a chunk of bloody dog meat. After that day, I had nightmares for weeks. Truly frightened by Alexander, I blocked all his contacts and even moved. Alexander tried to find me several times but failed.
Finally, he was furious. Ava, don't push me.
Alexander started appearing in public with Sophie frequently. Snowball's sudden death caused quite a stir in their circle. Someone gossiped, asking why he had divorced me.
Was it really because I had abused the dog? Was it really because I had abused the dog and had antisocial tendencies that Snowball had suddenly died?
Alexander remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. As a result, the rumor spread like wildfire throughout the circle. Animal rights activists, stray dog rescue centers, and dog lovers angrily accused me. They dug up my ID and work information. In an instant, I became a public enemy. It was then that I finally understood what Alexander meant by punishment. My best friend was furious and wanted to clear my name, but I stopped her. Don't worry. Alexander won't be smug for long. Out of a sense of solidarity between women, I called Sophie. Don't marry Alexander. He's not someone you can rely on. Sophie was surprised that I reached out to her. What? Are you jealous? She thought I was jealous and trying to sabotage their wedding. I hesitated for a moment but decided to warn her. You've seen what happened to Mia and me. Alexander is more ruthless than you think. Hey, don't project your failures onto me. You got what you deserved, being kicked out like that. Sophie's tone was harsh, her excitement about marrying into wealth clouding her judgment. She dropped her gentle facade, her words cutting and cruel. As for Mia, that poor dead girl, she was just unlucky. Her accident made room for me. Someone called for Sophie, and she abruptly hung up. I held the evidence gathered by the private investigator but couldn't bring myself to use it. I sent Sophie a text. Do you really think Mia died in an accident? But a glaring red exclamation mark appeared. The message didn't go through. Sophie had blocked me. On the day of Alexander and Sophie's wedding, my social media was flooded. Whether it was the makeup or something else, Sophie, who only vaguely resembled Mia, now looked strikingly similar in the videos. Even those who knew Mia were stunned. Is this real? She looks so much like Mia. I thought it was her for a moment. Is Alexander marrying Sophie or Mia? He must regret not being able to hold a wedding for Mia back then. This is so touching. It's like a wedding for his late wife. I'm almost in tears. I wish I could have such a devoted man. The comments were filled with praise for Alexander and sorrow for Mia. My best friend saw me staring at my phone in silence. Thinking I was upset, she comforted me. She's just a substitute. Beauty fades, and so will her favor. Ava, don't be too sad. This man isn't worth it. Sophie won't be smug for long. If Alexander chose her, he'll find younger girls in the future. My best friend didn't know I wasn't sad. I was disgusted. I used to complain and grieve, sad that I couldn't compare to Mia. I didn't blame Alexander for not loving me. I blamed myself for coming too late. But now, knowing the truth, I felt only disgust. For someone like Alexander, being loved by him was the real misfortune. Sophie, who seemed so triumphant now, was actually pitiful. On the way to the wedding, Ryan stopped me. I didn't want to involve him. I wanted to ruin Alexander alone. But Ryan stubbornly insisted, saying he could protect me. His sincerity and determination were evident. After a few seconds of eye contact, I relented. On the way, I brought a box. Ryan didn't ask questions, silently carrying it for me. Alexander and Sophie's wedding was grand and lavish. They invited almost everyone in their circle, including all company employees. Sophie wore a massive diamond ring. Her neck and wrists were adorned with expensive jewelry. It was said she had insisted on such a grand event, even attracting media attention. Alexander had agreed to it all. Rumors circulated that this was actually Alexander's wedding to Mia. Alexander was tall and handsome. Sophie was charming and delicate. The two stood together, looking deeply in love, a perfect match. Then, I appeared with the box. Alexander, are you marrying Sophie or Mia today? My words caused an uproar, shattering the facade of calm. Alexander's face darkened, and he ordered security to remove me. Sophie, however, remained composed, even smiling nonchalantly. Does it matter? I'm the one standing here today, not a dead woman. Her attitude calmed the commotion slightly. I glanced at her, then turned to Alexander, my tone calm. A dead woman? Do you really think it's that simple? The box was opened. A bloody, mangled object was revealed to the public. A surveillance video played, showing the package arriving at my door, my panicked reaction, and Alexander's deranged words. I gave you Snowball. Forgive me, please. The crowd erupted in chaos. Reporters seized the opportunity, cameras flashing. The rumors of me abusing the dog were debunked. The news of Alexander, the CEO of a prestigious company, killing his dog, quickly went viral. The insults and accusations once directed at me now targeted him. Netizens launched attacks, and Alexander's social media was flooded with hate. Security rushed to escort me out. Alexander sneered. You think this will ruin my wedding? It's just a dog. So what if I killed it? It was his own dog. Even if it weren't, for someone as powerful as Alexander, killing a dog would only bring temporary backlash. Over time, even the outrage would fade. But my revenge wasn't over. I had promised to destroy Alexander completely. For me, for Mia, and for Sophie. Alexander would be ruined and pay for his crimes. I presented another piece of evidence. In the surveillance footage, a young girl was on the phone in an elevator. Yao's Pastries, the one on Jianxi Road, right? Got it. They're ready at 7? I've never heard of that before. I'll be there at 7 sharp to get the first batch. The elevator doors opened, and the girl turned, revealing her face. It was Mia, who looked strikingly similar to Sophie. I held up a stack of documents, showing them to the media. Mia died in a car accident, ruled as an accident. But in fact, a year before her death, Alexander had taken out a massive life insurance policy on her. The owner of the car involved in the accident had been in contact with Alexander. Here are the transaction records. Mia's death wasn't an accident. I stared into Alexander's pale, sinister face, enunciating each word. It was premeditated murder for insurance money. The revelation caused an uproar. Alexander's dog abuse and murder for insurance scheme instantly made him the center of a scandal. The devoted persona he had maintained for a decade crumbled. Alexander and Mia had been deeply in love, starting a business together after graduation. They had lived in basements, sharing a single bowl of instant noodles. Alexander had once tearfully vowed to treat Mia well for the rest of his life. Mia had cut ties with her family, investing all her savings into Alexander's ventures. A virtuous wife lifts me to greatness. I will repay her with wealth. But Alexander's solemn promise had gone unfulfilled. His business ventures failed repeatedly, leaving him in debt. In desperation, he turned to Mia, who had stood by him through it all. After Mia's death, the insurance payout became the seed money for his next venture. This time, he succeeded, transforming from a poor man to a celebrated CEO. Once his business stabilized, Alexander began to long for the woman who had supported him during his hardest times. Guilt-ridden, he turned Snowball into a symbol of his remorse. His longing for Mia grew, and his personality became increasingly erratic. Eventually, he crafted the image of a devoted, loyal man on social media. Public outrage grew daily. The stock price of Alexander's company plummeted, and the wedding ended in chaos. The police took on the case, and Alexander's family hired a high-priced legal team. But in court, Alexander confessed to his crimes. He looked into the camera, seemingly relieved. He seemed deranged, his eyes wild. Mia, Snowball, I'll see you both in the afterlife. We'll be together forever. After Alexander was imprisoned, Sophie found me. Her gaze was complex. So that's what you meant that day. I didn't feel close enough to her to engage, so I turned to leave. Sophie's awkward voice came from behind. Thank you. I stopped but didn't turn around. While you're still young, focus on improving yourself. Don't rely on men. They're more dangerous than you think. With that, I walked away, leaving Sophie standing there, lost in thought. In the second year of Alexander's imprisonment, I received a call. He wanted to see me. I observed the man before me. Alexander had a buzz cut. He was thinner, darker, with dark circles under his eyes. He grew agitated upon seeing me, slamming into the glass. I watched coldly until he calmed down. In my life, I've wronged two people, you and Mia. It was a long overdue apology. I didn't feel joy or disgust. Instead, I felt an inexplicable calm. Alexander's words no longer stirred any emotion in me. If I could start over, I'd make it up to you both. I'd never take such measures again. Alexander spoke earnestly, his eyes bright, almost naive. I shook my head. But life doesn't give second chances. And even if it did, I picked up my bag and walked out, my tone steady. Someone like you deserves hell. No one wants your crocodile tears. Alexander wasn't truly remorseful or enlightened. All these years, he had had countless opportunities to confess and atone. But he had deceived himself, continuing to enjoy a life of luxury. Only in prison, truly afraid, did he begin to reflect. Alexander's sobs echoed behind me. But I had already stepped outside. The weather was beautiful, the sunset radiant. The past was gone, like smoke in the wind. From that day on I was reborn.